First up, thank you so much for your time. I enjoyed the movie, but more importantly, my wife enjoyed the movie, and she's not
Wow.
normally into this kind of film. And she was both excited to watch it with me and then had a good time with it afterwards. So, um, congratulations on making a movie that was able to win over my wife that does not like horror movies.
Dude, that's even better. I agree. My wife is not huge into horror, and this is something she enjoyed too. So I'm glad to hear it.
That's when I was, preparing because I interviewed Frank last week and was going to watch the movie. I kind of asked, do you want to watch this film with you? Here's the trailer. And she's like, yeah, actually, I want to check that out. And it was a little bit surprising to me. And then she was like all invested in the mythology and everything, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But so as for me, when I first saw the trailer for it, I saw Frank Grillo shooting a minigun at werewolves. I'm a simple person. I was like, all right, sold. I want to check out this movie. But as we
Right.
just mentioned, my wife watched it and she was like latched onto kind of the werewolf mythology in there of just changing up the formula a little bit. And that's kind of what drew her in. When did you get involved in the project and what drew you to this specific project?
Yeah, I was involved pretty early on. The script was kind of circulating around, Hollywood, and I had some people hit me up saying, "Hey, we think this is something you would really love." And so I read and it almost immediately latched on. I fell in love with it immediately. Matthew Hackett, the writer, he did such a great job with the script. And I also felt like the werewolves were things I haven't seen before in this kind of environment. And them getting all of the attention they were getting in the script also made it more appealing because usually it's like one werewolf or attacking a house or a little town or whatever, but the amount of werewolves we got in just a small amount of time to me hit home really quick and I loved it. So I jumped on as fast as I could and tried to find some people to snatch it up for me and help me get it made.
So watching the trailer, one thing a lot of people said, and they said it favorably, is this feels like the Purge with werewolves. And then
Sure.
even in talking with Frank last week, he said that's one of the things that drew him to it. He goes, "What's like the Purge anarchy with werewolves?" How aware of you in the development of the film? What was that kind of on your mind, or is that something that just kind of came out afterwards that it just had a little bit of that same flavor?
No, it had that flavor from the first read, and Frank's not wrong. He said that to me the first time we talked. He said immediately after he read it, he was like, "Steven, this is the Purge with werewolves," and I said, "You're right." And we actually had to actively try to make it not so much the Purge with the werewolves, so because we didn't want to step on those toes too much. But it's such a great idea that was easy. The elevator pitch, that was what we were saying when we were out with it. Frank was saying it the entire time we were shooting of how he felt about it. I mean, and also it helps with Frank in it that it just, adds to that
Of
mythos of what
course.
it is, right? So, we knew from very early on that that's what it felt like, and it just seemed like an easy comp.
Mhm. And to what you just said in there, what were those little things you wanted to do to make it stand out besides the obvious fact that it's filled with werewolves?
Well, I think the biggest things we wanted to do was give the werewolves personality. To me, that was something I had not seen in werewolf films before. They're usually pretty straightforward. They look very similar. So to me, it was like, how can I give each werewolf its own personality? Decide, because of who they change from and where the person that they were changing into a wolf. How can I sort of infuse that personality into each wolf? So that was something that to me really separated the movie from its predecessors.
Mhm. And to what I mentioned at the beginning of this about my wife, she's never watched a Purge movie. She's never had interest in watching them. And legitimately, whatever that allure is of werewolves, that was the hook to bring
Right.
in my wife and kind of this whole new audience. Diving into, like as I said before, what she dug about it is the film kind of does have this bold, different new approach to werewolf mythology. Not only is it multiple werewolves, it's that everyone is a werewolf and there's this genetic thing and changes in the world cause everyone to kind of turn into werewolf in moonlight. Kind of what inspired that creative shift? How did that impact the way you approach the story and in even to what you just said, develop the characters in that?
Yeah, the writer had such great, strong ideas about how that was very early on, and we were constantly in talks. I mean, even when we were doing early rewrites of the material with him, we were in contact, obviously, daily to make sure that that sort of mythos was grounded. It felt realistic. It almost felt like a virus. And to be honest, it was sort of hitting right at the time. We
Mhm.
got the script before the pandemic, and then the pandemic happened, and we were like, wow, this is just sort of feeding into what we were already doing, which was wild. And so to kind of keep that in mind while we were shooting it was a big part of it, to try to feel everybody had sort of understood what it was like to be, shut down, shut in, something's happening in the world. And so it was easy to sort of feed that into the shooting of the movie because it felt so real. And that to me is something that felt different for a werewolf film to feel real, because there's such a extreme character that I don't know that everyone feels that this could happen, but for some reason this movie made it feel like it could happen because of what we had just gone through.
So like last year I did a video where I was kind of talking about top werewolf and vampire movies, and it was surprising how far fewer werewolf movies there are compared to vampire movies, in particular, like the big iconic ones. There weren't nearly as many as I thought there were. Which specific werewolf movies influenced this film, or just kind of genre speaking in general? What kind of inspired some of this?
Yeah, Dog Soldiers was a big one because I felt like that was one that really mixed the action with the werewolf pretty heavily, and the look of the werewolf was so great. Obviously, The Howling and American Werewolf in London were big influences as far as 80s genre that I was trying to go for. But Underworld was a big one too, because I thought what the first Underworld did in that movie was really give werewolves on-screen time that had not really been done. I mean, we saw the werewolves in that movie 90% of the time. And I love that. And so to me, that was something I was trying to accomplish with our film, was really give the werewolves their due. Because like you, I hadn't seen that many big werewolf movies that come out just focusing on the werewolves. The humans have their thing, and that's what we get, one werewolf kind of moaming around. But this was like, how can we get the werewolves to be the stars? So that was something that we focused on.
You touched on a couple things I was about to head towards. I watching the movie absolutely got kind of the 80s vibe to it in multiple different senses. Of course, it goes practical, but beyond that, it just has that vibe of so many of those movies that were formative to me back when I was growing up. So how intentional were those 80s vibes, and what were those movies you're trying to pull from it and influence?
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% intentional. I mean, I'm an 80s kid at heart too. Like I grew up
just looking behind movies. You.
Yeah, I grew up on these movies. They're my favorite. I love that sort of vibe, style. I love the feel where it sort of oozes off the screen. You can feel everything. You can touch it. That to me was really important when making the movie. We really looked at a lot of movies, but one that really inspired me growing up was Silver Bullet as a werewolf movie. And that's because the movie, not only was it sort of under the radar as far as Stephen King's films go, but the movie is underrated as far as a werewolf movie. It's just a really cool werewolf genre film that splices all kinds of different elements, which is a town fighting against a werewolf. There's a priest who's a werewolf, so it incorporates some religion into it. It's just a really cool film when you go back and watch. I mean, a werewolf actually beats a guy with a bat. And I don't know that I've ever seen werewolves pick up instruments. So there was things like that we were watching going, okay, what are these movies doing that we can sort of take from and push to the next level?
Somewhat along those same lines, one of the things, specifically on going practical with the film, was that always the plan? And what were the benefits, challenges of that? Any specific stories of going practical and what came about on set?
Yeah, anytime you're dealing with practical, it is a monster, no pun intended. It is really difficult, especially with their werewolves. And we had, 7 of these suits built. And so you have these really tall gentlemen in these suits, and then add the head on top of that, which is another foot or so. So they were monstrous on set. So it was always our goal from day one to go practical. Like I said, anything I could touch, feel on screen was more my jam. So I really wanted to focus on giving that to the audience. And to be honest, look, most of this audience I'm hoping that goes to see this movie, I don't know that they've seen practical monsters in a long time. They've seen CGI things. So I really thought maybe this is a chance for that kind of an audience to see this again and go, oh, wow, that looks great. Or that's even scarier because it feels right there on screen. So it was always a goal for us to do that. But I mean, look, when we're shooting werewolves in the rain or werewolves trying to run through fences and charge homes, it's always a huge challenge on a movie that's on a budget, an indie film, and you're trying to make it feel big and exciting. There's always challenges, but testament to the crew. They were able to really rally behind what the movie was, what we were trying to get done. And you had some really great animatronics and puppeteering happening. So those kind of things just make it a lot of fun.
Yeah, that's just watching it, immediately seeing a real thing there as opposed to a CGI, CGI cartoon. Just immediately feel a thing it present in there. And it just has a different vibe to it. It just immediately called me back to so many movies that I grew up watching. Um, Kind of somewhat in the same ballpark of with the movie, I thought it blended a number of genres pretty well, where it is a horror movie, it is an action movie, but then there's also like a conspiracy aspect to it. And then it also just kind of plays out like a thriller. One of the things I talked about with Frank is the specific scene where he's under the car and just
Yeah.
the tension that comes with that. It's a thriller. How did you go about trying to blend all of those and kind of make it feel seamless where it all has a consistent feel throughout the entire film?
That's really difficult. I mean, when you're dealing with movies that have this much going on and really trying to ride the line of the tone and making sure it doesn't flip flop one way or the other too much, and you're trying to give an audience, that much excitement, like what you said, also thrills at the same time, it really just comes down to prepping the movie pretty heavily and really understanding with Frank early on what we were trying to make. And Frank's just so good at knowing what he does best and really
Mhm.
infusing that into the movie, but really infusing that with me and what I do. And we can sort of combine our skills to make something that the audience was really going to love. And that's what I enjoyed about working with Frank is he just allowed me the sort of that playground and sort of trust to say, hey, you're going to pull off some of this stuff. I mean, I think there's plenty of times where he looked at me and goes, bro, is this going to be good? Yeah, because it's just, you never know when you're making a monster movie. But credit to him that he always trusted me and was going along for the ride to really try to ride this tone. And I think we really pulled it off.
Kind of moving in a bit of a different direction, but kind of big picture talking about the film in general. The thing that kind of got me, I've gone back to the same language kind of over and over again, but it reminded me so much of the movies that I watched growing up in the 80s and 90s that made me love movies.
Mm-hmm.
And we just don't see those in the theater nearly as often anymore. As someone that makes movies, what's your kind of take on what's going on in Hollywood that they're not making these types of films as often? They're not greenlighting these films as often for a theatrical release.
Yeah, it's really sad. It's kind of scary at some points because you really
Mm-hmm.
love these kind of movies and you want to see them in the theater. And I think clearly, like, there's an appetite for that. There's an audience for that, where we saw with Terrifier 3 and things like this, where an
Mm-hmm.
audience will show up if you give them something to show up for. I feel like they're just, a lot of it comes down to money, right? They just don't want to lose money. They're scared to lose money. But I think what they forget is they can make these movies on a budget. And
Right.
if they could really scale back and try to figure out a way to get back to that model where you're making those 15 to 30 million dollar movies that actually have practical effects and things like that they can make some money on these kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, I wish we had that kind of money for this movie, but I'm just saying, like, they could figure out a way to do that for some of these movies that don't need to be $200 million, and really find a way to make some money and get a profit. I think so. It's difficult with that, and then you throw in a werewolf movie, which is even more difficult because it's just
Mm-hmm.
well known in Hollywood that for some reason werewolf movies don't do well. So it's always difficult, and it's really a miracle that we were able to get this one into as many screens as we're getting into it on a nationwide release. And so, I take that very humbly because to me, that's something that I've been wanting my entire career. I've always had, a smaller release. This is my biggest. So I'm excited that the actual audience is going to get to see this movie big and loud. So for me, I'm just really stoked on it.
Yeah, that's where I think you say like Hollywood doesn't want to lose money, and then we all see them put $250 million towards certain movies where we all go,
Right.
who thought that could work? What are you doing with that? I'm reading a book right now about the all the blockbusters of 1982, and there's a whole section on how the industry shifted from trying to get singles and doubles to only trying to get home runs, and even more
Right.
so, if you look at now, it's not even home runs, it's grand slams, where you
Yep.
just have to make $1 billion to be profitable with these insane budgets, and you just go, what are you doing? Why don't you make movies that aren't trying to be 4 quadrant, but a movie that 1 quadrant will love at a small budget? That
Yeah.
we're out there. We love these movies, and there's even the examples of John Wick is a gigantic hit movie, and it's an action film, and you
I
can
think it
do
has to
that.
do it. I think it's a lot of content purposes. You know what I mean? There's just so much content out there. They're trying to compete with all of that content.
Mhm.
And their thinking is that we got to throw more money at it so that way it feels bigger and louder and makes more of an impact for people to go see it. I just feel like that's not the case. I feel like the audience understands what they want to see. And I think if you give them something that looks fun, exciting, or whatever the genre is, that they're going to show up, because I think people love going to the movies still. I still believe that. I have a 14-year-old daughter who's in high school, and her friends still go to movies on Friday nights. That's what they like to do, right? So I know it's still something kids like to do. I think Hollywood just has to get back to figuring out a way to make these things so people will want to see them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head with a lot of it. That the thinking is just throw more money at it to make it stand out, rather than having an idea that kind of is a hook. The Purge with werewolves is so simple, but you go, oh, that sounds like fun. That sounds cool. And that's what I got on Twitter one day, and one of my buddies had tweeted out the trailer, and it said, The Purge with werewolves. I'm sold. Right. And he went, right. It's a good idea that can spread easily. And just want more things like that. Not let's just throw a ton of money at a totally bland, generic idea that we've seen so many times before.
I agree. I think that time's coming. I think it's a good moment in movies right now, because I feel like everyone's sort of bubbling up with that same consensus. So, and I also think indie filmmakers have just a really strong option right now of what they can do. There's just so many different outlets for them to make movies, so many different ways. I mean, they have cameras in their pocket now. So I think that sort of lends indie cinema to sort of make a comeback right now.
Well, this year, I got to interview Osgood Perkins about Longlegs. Yeah. This movie made under 10 million and made like $100 million, because
that movie.
It was, so did I. And it just like had such a great look to it and vibe, and it got people talking. I got to talk to Damien about Terrifier 3, like this true underground filmmaking, and it became the highest, grossing unrated film of all time, because people want to see interesting things, and they will.
And they allow the audience to do that marketing for them almost too, which is what I love. I love the grassroots, fans getting behind things, getting on whatever social media they're on, telling people they got to see it. To me, that's what I love about movies, is when the fans really get behind it. And I think that's something that obviously Hollywood could look to and say, okay, how do we get these fans into it? Well, you give them what they want, give them material that they're going to get excited about. They'll go see it.
And that's exactly why I reached out about doing this interview, is like, I want more movies like this made. What can I do to talk about like a good old throwback action movie? That's The Purge with werewolves, Frank Grillo with a minigun, and it got my wife excited about it. That's a lot of wins. Just got a couple more questions for you with our time. If someone enjoys this film, they see this movie and they enjoy it, what werewolf movies or other action movies would you recommend to them?
Oh, man, I think if they love this movie, look, I would go back. And if it's a werewolf movie, I think you definitely got to watch Dog Soldiers. Dog Soldiers to me is one of my favorite werewolf movies. It's such a great film. There's another one called Ginger Snaps, which is really cool. A really cool, different kind of take on werewolves. And then when it comes to action, like this movie takes a lot of cues from the original Blade and Blade 2, which is movies that in the late 90s really took action and vampire mythos horror and blended it really well together. And so that's something that I think this movie really kind of copies.
Yeah. So Dog Soldiers was one of those movies I watched for the first time with that video I mentioned earlier. And it was like, well, this is cool. Like
definitely.
I want to see more things like this. But so many of the movies you've referenced here, those are like the movies near and dear to my heart. Still remember seeing Blade in high school and having a great time with it. Final question, same type of idea, but this one just open to whatever you want to recommend at this point in time. One of my favorite things I love to do with my channel is introduce a movie to someone that they've never heard of before. So my go-to movie is usually Warrior, which Frank is in.
Sure.
And what's a movie that you love to recommend to people and introduce them to it?
I think a movie that I really love, and this is recent because a lot of people don't know it's out there, is a movie called Bangkok Dog. Bangkok Dog is a really stellar action movie. It just came out recently, but it's kind of been circling around. It's a really fantastic foreign fight film that just gets to the action, gets to the point. It's really fun and has some really great storylines going on. But I really love the sort of underground indie action stuff, and Bangkok Dog is really cool.
Well, I'll have to check that one out. My first movie review webpage back in 1988 was a Jackie Chan fan webpage. So that's anything like that. I hear that and I go, wait, what do I need to be? What is this?
You have to see it. Yeah, it's fun.
Awesome. Hey, thank you so much for your time. As I said at the beginning, I enjoyed the film. More importantly, you were able to win over my wife. So congratulations on the film.
Thanks so much for having me. This is rad. Thank you.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to letting people know about it, and I'm sure they'll have a great time with it.